So the Swiss National Bank has cut interest rates to zero in order to protect the Swiss economy against deflation and also trying to maybe stimulate some growth back. But we know that based on monetary mechanics, it's not really how it works. But we're going to be discussing today why they're doing that and why exactly on that fashion, despite having other tools to disposal. But first off, let's start with the whole ZERP, right? Zero interest rates are back. So this means that the Swiss are actually the on the vanguard of the whole movement, right? Along with Japan, the Swiss can be a kind of a barometer to see what's going on, but also what the future could look like for the Fed. And I would take definitely a lot of attention to this because if the Fed is always late, this means that the Swiss are actually one of the very first to do this movement. So, if you see here what's been happening to interest rates, they were actually negative, right? The Swiss were very known for that, and this is actually something that explains a lot of how our monetary system works, because the Swiss franc is a currency that is used as good collateral, as safety and liquidity. So we created this narrative of inflation during the pandemic. So you can see here on 2022, it goes up until 1.6 ish percent, and then there is the cut back to zero, and the probabilities of it just going further down the road to negative interest rates and bringing it back because it was extinct after Japan has cut them. It's actually pretty significant. So let's see what happens. But if we have a look to the Swiss franc itself compared to the dollar, we can clearly see a movement here around March and April, especially April, where it just skyrocketed. And this is important because the Swiss franc is part of the DXY, which is a dollar index against the one of the main currencies, which the Swiss franc is part of that basket that involves the euro, the pound, and so on. And if you see here what happens, if you remember what happened on April, it was exactly that downturn on the S&P 500. So there was a lot of risk off movement, and capital was just going outside of the U.S. The ex-U.S. trade was really the highlight. And if you contrast both of them, if you put here the S&P 500 performance on the yellow line, you can clearly see how they are inversely correlated. And this shows how Swiss francs are seen as a great defensive currency. So this movement is actually not great for Switzerland. It's not great for anybody because this means that the world's liquidity is afraid of something. If, they are trying to get into safety and liquidity. And when this happens, the Swiss need to try to defend themselves because that creates deflation based on the fact that most of the consumption in Switzerland is imports, right? It's a very small country, less than 10 million inhabitants. So this creates a lot of problems for growth for the industry. So it could be seen as something great, but they also depend a lot on exports. So not only the watches and everything that we know and knives, but mechanical parts, motors, many equipments, right? So the chemical industry, and for sure tourism is actually uh, uh, pretty strong in Switzerland, but it was already an expensive country, and this does not help at all. It's one of the most expensive destinations on earth if you want to go there. But before we jump into the details on how the mechanics actually work and why Switzerland is such a good barometer. Of course, every single video I try to give you a new tool so that you can do your own macro research. But it's a lot to talk about in a few minutes, and for sure, the best way for you to follow everything that we're doing. However, but even better, understanding how you can act on it to your investments. We do have our Bitcoin intelligence reports on. We have a brand new dashboard that we released, and then you can see not only the written articles but also the videos that come as well with that. So you can see here how we discussed about the 30-year bond auction in the United States. I talk a lot about the monetary mechanics. Sina talks a lot about all macro, the macro scenario, and we have many charts for you to have a look. Also for on-chain analysis for Bitcoin. But of course, if you want to understand Bitcoin, you really need to understand macro, which is a whole world in itself, so that you understand how liquidity drives a lot of it. And links are on the description below. Just make sure you use the promo code below for 5% off your subscription as well. All right. So let's get back to it. So the one of the most interesting parts, if you want to use the Swiss franc as a barometer and also the SNB policy, is to understand that this is a defensive movement. It's to understand repo. So repo is, I talk a lot about that in other videos as well, where repo is the only way for any bank or non-bank entity to get the true liquidity, true credit. We have a debt related system, a credit based system. So that means that you need good collateral and also the most stable currency as you can get. And the Swiss franc has actually been seen on one of the currencies who could maybe replace the dollar. However, this is not very realistic at all because of the amount of liquidity that it has provided. Switzerland is such a small country, and you cannot compare this to a global reserve currency and a whole lira dollar system that expanded since the 60s until we had the end of the gold standard in 71. By then, we already have the biggest network on earth. So I would like for you to think of the dollar as being actually the euro dollar, the dollars outside of the United States, because that's truly our global reserve currency, the deepest pool you can get of liquidity along with US bonds. However, it does not mean that US bonds are the only collateral used at all. It's the pristine one, but German bonds, for example, and for sure Swiss debt and the Swiss currency as well are used as a way to have access, like Bitcoin, access to pristine not only collateral but also a scarce asset, so to speak. However, this creates a lot of trouble for the Swiss in their economy, and they have to defend themselves. Maybe some countries, for example, what they do is to use their FX reserves and euro dollars and try to put them into auction and provide a little bit more liquidity on that to try to ease out that strength. However, here is the opposite. The franc is actually too strong against the dollar because of that international demand. And now what they could do is, of course, offer more francs to try to ease that out. That's actually the most simple way, because that's what most countries do with fiscal spending. So you print more of that currency, and Switzerland is actually in a great position to do that because it's not part of the EU. So they have their own central bank. They would be able to do that, but there's a little bit of a problem there. Switzerland could create problems with the United States, and they went the diplomatic route, because lately what happened is the US has a report, so they keep track on currency manipulators, and they put into a blacklist, which could create a lot of problems if you want to have access to the Eurodollar system, which the U.S. has not total control, not at all. They're not able to control everything. No country has that kind of control, but they have more control than the others, and that's a relative game. That's what matters on that game. And what happened is Switzerland, along with Ireland, was added into a monitoring list. That means that they haven't been considered yet as currency manipulators, but they are just on just being monitored, right? So let's see how that goes. So Switzerland, instead of just trying to get that dollar, the Swiss franc down by just printing more money, they went the other route. So they try to punish, so to speak, whoever holds their assets. So this is exactly why you see moves like this happening. So if you hold Swiss bonds, so basically you're getting zero yields, but you could even pay to hold them. So this is actually what justifies the existence of negative interest rates or even zero interest rates. Why would anyone buy an instrument that provides no yield? And this is exactly why you have to stop thinking about bonds and just a way to make money or just to create some kind of yield as an instrument by itself, like comparing to stocks or crypto, and just try to think of it as collateral. Then things start to click, and then you understand exactly what's been looking for. So sometimes it justifies you having negative interest rates because you're actually paying for the privilege of having that kind of pristine collateral inside Europe. So this is something that you can think about. But this is not a great sign. This just means that Switzerland is on the vanguard of a movement that is already happening with other central banks around the world, and it's just going down. The Fed, as it being considered too slow, right? It's on the tail of that whole movement because they're still deciding about is sticky inflation there? Can we control to 2%? Are tariffs inflationary? Which is a whole kind of confusing metric. So Switzerland is actually more realistic to what is truly happening to the monetary plumbing. So we take a look at that, and also other central banks as well who are following that movement. And then let's see if Japan's gonna maybe pivot and follow, and of course what everybody expects, the Fed as well, to do the same thing, because as I mentioned, also Jeff Snyder, for example, is one of the biggest voices on that. We have a synchronized downward economic activities since 2008 due to how the whole monetary plumbing is set up. And of course, details on that you can always read on our Bitcoin intelligence report as well. All right, guys. So yeah, if you can take just one tool for yourself from this video, just watch CHF, the Swiss franc, as a barometer for what's happening. And unfortunately, the signs are not that great. All right. So see you in the next video.